She stole the future I had sketched in quiet margins and late-night plans. She smiled as she took it, wearing my life like a garment that fit her better than it should have. Her name was Celeste, and she arrived in our family like a polished secret. Soft laughter, the practiced tilt of a head, a tendency to make every room feel lighter just by being in it. We were raised as stepsisters, but the world always treated her as if she were the original. Perfect in photos, easy in conversation, the sort of woman people assumed had never needed to fight for anything. I was the one who favored small, deliberate joy, slow-cooked dinners, the steady growth of a business, the way a ring can sit warm against your skin and make the future feel possible. I was engaged to Thomas, the kind of man who loved with quiet gestures and steady hands. We had plans and a stubborn tenderness that felt like a promise. Celeste watched us with the calm attention of someone learning a script, and I never imagined that script would be used to write me out of my own life. At first, her theft looked like compliments and borrowed dresses, the usual intimacies sisters exchange. She would borrow my shawl and return it scented with perfume I didn't recognize. She began to repeat a nickname Thomas used for me, as if appropriating the small intimacies would make him hers. I laughed it off because I wanted to be generous. That generosity became the scaffold of her deceit. The first lie was whisper light, a suggestion that I was too controlling when I asked Thomas about his late-night calls. The second was a carefully placed rumor to a client who had been thinking about signing a contract with my studio anyway. Suddenly they felt unsure about my stability. Piece by piece, she undermined me with a finesse that made accusation look ugly and made sympathy effortless to pity. Then the night I walked into the apartment I had shared with Thomas to surprise him with dinner, I saw them. Celeste and him, his hand on her back, as if it belonged there, her head tipped toward his shoulder like a private son. She lifted her face and smiled a little too sweetly at me. "You always had everything," she said, voice soft as velvet. "It's my turn now." There was no dramatic scene from me. Drama would have fed the version of me she could control. I left instead, because if I screamed, I would have given her the narrative she wanted, the unstable fiancé undone by envy. Within a week, the town had built a different truth. She became the wounded one, the one who had fallen into someone's arms. I became the woman people whispered about, the one with too much pride, too much demand, too much to lose. Thomas married her beneath spring light, and my name became the kind of headline that implies blame without evidence. Months later, I died, an accident that folded my small life into headlines and then into memory. In that silence before oblivion, I thought I had been taken in full. Then, impossibly, I opened my eyes in my old bedroom with sunlight I remembered, 2 years before any of it began. The ring still warmed my finger, the world unspooled like a map I could study. Reborn is a strange, sharp word. It tasted of second chances and of responsibility. I could have returned tender and vengeful both. Instead, I returned methodical and hungry for a different thing. Not only to punish her, but to reclaim the life she'd pretended to want, and make it stronger than anything she could have stolen. This time, my revenge would be fast, because I had learned that slow vengeance calcifies into a permanent ache. I had no desire to spend another decade watching pity settle into a new life. I began by changing the smallest things, my timing, my tone, the way I let Thomas see me. Where I once explained, now I demonstrated. I let competence and warmth take the place of pleading. I also learned to cultivate allies quickly. There is an art to making a community your armor. Friends who had drifted when rumor did its work were reached out to with honesty I had once been too proud to offer. Clients worried by a scandal I knew would come were reassured with new contracts, guarantees things that could not be whispered away. Love complicated the plan, because Thomas returned to me in that timeline like a man half awake, full of confusion and apology, and I had to decide what to do with a heart that still remembered its own vows. I could have wrapped him back into my arms the first night he begged for forgiveness, and a part of me wanted that simple mending. Instead, I made a different choice. I gave him the chance to prove courage rather than telling him to be brave. I asked for concrete things, truths he had to claim in actions, not words, small proofs that measured how much regret could turn into repair. That clarity saved me from falling for his remorse, for letting the gravity of what once was pull me into what would hurt me again. Celeste noticed the change and ramped up her performances. She staged small dramas meant to show me as unreasonable, a staged outburst at a fundraiser designed to make guests flow to her side, an artful tear at a luncheon that made her appear fragile. But she miscalculated one thing. People tire of the same choreography. When her dramas repeated, they looked rehearsed. I moved faster. I made a few calls. I produced a folder of digital receipts, bank transfers, and emails she'd insisted were private. I showed them to the right person, not the press, but someone who would act. A partner at her firm, who suddenly had a liability to consider. A client whose loyalty could be secured in exchange for seeing the truth. I did not aim to humiliate her publicly with sensationalism. I wanted to collapse the scaffolding she had built beneath herself. The morning it happened felt sudden because I had made it so. A prominent client withdrew a partnership from her company after a quiet meeting in which I laid out the pattern. The manipulations, the casual thefts of credit, the emotional currency she traded mercilessly. The domino fell quickly. Her invitations thinned. Thomas's hesitant apologies turned into questions he asked aloud for the first time. Questions about why he had fallen for a version of her that never existed. I moved swiftly and with purpose because when you are reborn, you are granted not just a second life, but the clarity to protect it. The romance that followed my recovery was not impulsive. It was careful and rooted in new kinds of proof. I met Jacob at a gallery opening, someone who saw my work, and then me, without needing to reframe my story. He listened when I spoke, and did not try to fill the silence with platitudes. He loved me in small, steady increments, coffee delivered on a rainy morning, a hand offered at the base of a flight of stairs, a presence that respected my scars rather than seeking to erase them. That gentleness healed faster than any grand gesture could have. He became the man who loved me while I was whole again, not while I was waiting to be made whole. Celeste left town soon after. No dramatic collapse, no theatrical fall from grace in the papers. Instead, a thinning social life. A husband who could not find the woman he'd married, and blamed her in private for not being what he had wanted to believe. She wrote one letter asking for forgiveness, and then another pleading at my door. I read both, and kept none. There was no need to torment her. Pain had already done that work. The speed of my comeback surprised everyone who had assumed grief would keep me small. By acting quickly, rebuilding, proving sincerity through action, refusing to be the woman who waited for men to save her, I reclaimed clients, friendships, and my father's wary respect. Where they expected years of mourning, I offered a new standard. Resilience is not patient, it is decisive. The lesson I carry is simple and honest. Betrayal can either become a long shadow that narrows your days, or it can be the spark that makes you rebuild faster, smarter, and with allies who value truth. I chose to move fast, to make repair a priority, and to let romance be the balm rather than the demand. In taking back my future swiftly, I made sure the life that rose from the ashes was one built on my terms, with work I loved, a love that steadied rather than consumed, and boundaries that no one could cross without consequence. Celeste thought she had taken everything. Instead, she lit the match that allowed me to remake the world on my own terms. She will always be part of my story, but she will never be its rest.